Ever had builds fail because of wrong Flutter version? This video is for you. I'll show you how to pin a Flutter version for each project using FVM, Flutter version management, and how to make vscode use it. Let's first understand the problem here. Developers often have multiple apps that require different Flutter SDKs. Using global Flutter causes conflicts. FVM solves this by letting you install and pin specific Flutter version per project. Here I have a project called Path. Let's see what version am I using globally for all my Flutter projects. So I'm using 3.35.7. Here I have another project called UniqueBot that will also be using the same global Flutter SDK. UniqueBot is an old project while Path is a new one. Let's try to resolve dependencies in Path application. Alright, I'm not facing any errors in Path application while resolving dependencies, but in this UniqueBot application I'm facing this error while trying to resolve the dependencies. This is happening because UniqueBot is an old project which requires a different Flutter SDK, while the Path application, which is the new one, it is fine working on the latest Flutter version. So to resolve this problem, we are going to use FVM. We are basically going to pin a Flutter version specific to the project. So even though we will be having a different global Flutter SDK, but specific to a project, we will be using a different Flutter SDK. So let's start installation process of FVM. So we are going to run a command .pub global activate FVM. Next we can run FVM version command to check the version of FVM. Now we are going to edit environment variables. So we're going to add the path for FVM and make sure to remove any other Flutter bin path if exist, because we are only going to use FVM for identifying the required Flutter SDK for the projects. We need to edit both user variables and system variables. Now we're going to install a particular Flutter SDK version that we want to set as global for all the projects. And now we will set it globally. Same way we can install more using the FVM install command. Now we will use this FVM list command that is going to show us all the Flutter versions that we've added using install command. As we can see, one of the version is set as global, so if there is any project which is not pinned with any Flutter SDK, then by default this global version will be used. Now for particularly UniqueBot application, I'm going to set a Flutter SDK version 3.22.0. So for that I'm going to install FVM install version 3.22.0. Now I'm going to use FVM use version command to pin this particular SDK version to this Unicode project. It will take some time. Now we have .fvm file and vscode file, which is having settings.json. Here we can see that the project is assigned with a particular Flutter SDK, and same way we can see in configuration file. Here we need to make sure that we are adding this configuration file and the settings file in GitHub, but we are not supposed to add Flutter SDK or versions file. These are very huge ones, and we need to put them in gitignore file. Because of this settings file, if we are going to use start debugging or run without debugging, or we are going to use this run button directly, it will make sure to use this assigned Flutter SDK version in place of the global one. Here in terminal, from now on we are only going to use FVM keyword along with the Flutter commands like FVM Flutter pub get, FVM Flutter clean, or FVM Flutter run. Without FVM, the project will not understand that it needs to use the assigned Flutter SDK. If we are not going to use FVM, then the project will use the default Flutter SDK in place of this assigned one. Now if I run this command, I'm going to see that all the dependencies are resolved successfully because we are using the correct Flutter SDK which was required by this particular project. Now if I try to remove the FVM keyword and use Flutter pubget alone, then it is going to use the global Flutter SDK in place of the Flutter SDK which is assigned to this project. In that case, we are going to see an error. So here we are getting this error. So to make sure we don't get such error and we are using the correct Flutter SDK, we need to use FVM keyword. Now let's suppose there is a case where I am in a different project. There is no Flutter SDK assigned to that project, and still if I am using this FVM keyword, then also it will consider using global Flutter SDK, and if there is any Flutter SDK assigned to that project, then it will use that Flutter SDK. So it is always safe to use FVM, and I would say it is the best practice to use FVM keyword for whenever we are using the Flutter commands in any of the projects. Now let's suppose we are not aware of which Flutter SDK to use for the project. Then we need to check the pubspec YAML file, and we can see in environment the comparable SDK in Flutter. Then we can try different versions, and whichever one is resolving the dependencies, that one we can pin with the project. Now let's see Padheta application. Here still if we will run Flutter pubget, it will resolve dependencies as we are using global Flutter SDK here. And for unique port, we need to use FVM Flutter pubget. Here we are going to use SDK which is defined for this project. And to test the same, we can use FVM Flutter version command in both the projects individually, and we can check which Flutter SDK version is being used for each project. Now let's try and run both the projects. So I'm currently running Badhita application. Now we will try to run unique pod application. These are all the commands which were used in this video. I'll share this document as well. As we can see, the unique pod project is also now working. That's it. You now have stable project level Flutter versions. Thank you.